I just want to say so much of this is the frisson of the rebel, and I just want to read you these two sentences. It's nonsense to pretend, for instance, that at this date there's something daring and original in proclaiming yourself an anarchist, an atheist. The daring thing, or at any rate the unfashionable thing, is to believe in God. That was 2002, Christopher Hitchens, in a review of Yves Lenoir and George Orwell. And I think that there's some truth to that. It actually is very difficult to argue God in the public square these days.
Since Spinoza, yes.
What's that?
Since Spinoza, yes.
Since Spinoza, yes. Actually, since Hitchens and Harris. But despite the fact that there's no question, there is no question, as has been not only pointed out but easily admitted, that religious thinkers in the 21st century don't actually, if they have good sense, pronounce identical nostrums to religious thinkers in the 2nd century, even though they may use much of the material to explain what they believe. The dilemmas and the essential answers are the same. And the dilemma that we're facing is the extraordinarily difficult realization that when you die, you lose everything. And that's always been true. And everyone has always faced that. And that's, have time for a really short poem?
Yeah.
Hausman, A.E. Hausman, has this kid standing in the town square. He says, "Good people, do you love your lives, and have you ears for sense? Here is a knife like other knives that cost me 18 pence. I need but plunge it in my heart, and down will come the sky, and earth's foundations will depart, and all you folk will die." Right? It's like you lose everything when you die. And that's always been the case. And religion, in one sense, has always realized that, which is why you get, especially in, I'll speak about my own tradition, a tremendous emphasis on making this world better. Which is why you can't build a community without what we would call essentially a welfare state in any Jewish community in the world. Because the understanding is there will always be suffering, there will always be pain, and it's the human job to ameliorate that. We're actually taking the discussion a little bit to a different level, to the consternation of some of my discussion partners, which is to say, look, you all know, for example, let's think about this not as biologists but as physicists. You all know that there's this idea in physics of multiple universes. That is, that right now there is a universe, or many of them, that parallel our own, with maybe slight differences, like maybe there's a universe where Rabbi Artson and I are winning. But other than that, there are these multiple universes. Now, in a world in which it is possible to assume that there are multiple universes that go on at the same time, is it not possible to believe that there are multiple lives for human beings that live in this universe? That's actually, despite the fact that I know you have many problems with religious history and religious doctrine, that's the question we were asked tonight. Is it possible that there's an afterlife? And both from a scientific point of view and from a religious point of view, our affirmation is that it is possible. It's not certain. We don't know what the afterlife is, but it is possible. And if you come out of this discussion opening your mind to the possibility that this world is not all, then we will have won.
David, I want to push you on that, because this was actually my first question to you. What do you see that afterlife as?
My answer.
Jewish tradition talks about reincarnation. It talks about
it does.
But
the Jewish tradition also is deliberately agnostic about the nature of it. So it offers you images. It offers you Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, about which there's almost no description in the Bible. It says Yeshiva Shamala, that is, you get to study Talmud with God. As one of my Talmud teachers once said, for some people it's heaven, for some people it's hell. But the point is that you know, it's like what Chekhov said. Chekhov said that you only get multiple treatments for a disease when there's no cure for the disease, right? If there's a cure, you got one treatment. You only get multiple images of the afterlife if you don't know what the afterlife is. And at least in the Jewish tradition, no one was so foolish as to be dogmatic and say, this is what the afterlife looks like. I'll rest with what Nabokov has John Shade say in Pale Fire. He says, life is such a surprise, why should death be any less of one?
No, it's very, I mean, it's very attractive as well as clever what David is trying to do. Saying that it's very attractive as well as very clever what David's trying to do. He's saying
You could stop there.
that the most saying that it's those of us who doubt the supernatural who have the failure of imagination. And good move. But there's no one who can't play this game. There could be an afterlife and no God. Why not? There could be many gods and no afterlife. There could be a God with a sense of humor where good people went to hell and evil people and evil people carried on as in his initial creation, ruling the roost. I'm willing to imagine, as Princess Leia says in Star Wars. I can quote literature and scripture too. She wants to borrow Harrison's starship, and he's reluctant, and her envoy says she's prepared to offer you more money than you can imagine. And he says, well, I can imagine quite a lot. I can imagine quite a lot too, but here's what we're meant to discuss, I think. Those who have claimed to know in advance the rules of reward and punishment, and the actual details of the afterlife, people who actually have and continue to rule the mental lives of millions of people, who have to explain away things like Sam's 9 million dead children by saying, well, what happens to their souls? St. Augustine has to come up with an answer. He says they go to limbo. At least if they're not baptized Catholic, that's where they go. So millions of people for hundreds of years thought that's where their children were. A terrible form of sadism and mental serfdom that the church is now considering dropping. But that limbo was really real to people when it was imagined for them by a sadistic North African pseudo-intellectual. So it's not a failure of imagination to say that this use of imagination is perverse. Neither Sam nor I have said it's impossible that there be a post-life existence. We've just said that it's not knowable, not that it's not known. So surely the default position must be that it's those who have ever said that resurrection or an afterlife is a dogma who have the explaining to do. For myself, I'm very open to that. I like surprises.
Brad.
I find myself once again agreeing with everything that Christopher Hitchens said, except
You thought I was clever too?
except for 1%.
Except for 1%.
And for me, the main reason for an afterlife is frankly not to bring justice about in this world, but I won't have time in this lifetime to read as much as David Wolpe. And I would like to read some of the references that he's able to spit out all the time in such a learned way. Look, you talk about being at a cafeteria, and it does feel to me like we're using a stacked deck. So what religion says in the 2nd century is grist for the mill, and what science said in the 2nd century is, of course, outmoded. And so chronologically, there's this monolith called religion, and then science is only responsible for right now. But even right now, there are credible physicists who are teaching in universities who teach this theory of multiverse, and there are people like Sean Carroll at Cal Poly who say that's not science. You can't prove it, you can't disprove it, so that's nonsense masquerading as science. You can't prove or disprove dark matter or dark energy, but it does make the theory work, right? You can't get quantum gravity to fit with relativity, but they work in their own. So the challenge here is it's a violation, I think, of accuracy to claim that what science does is only affirm what is verifiable or falsifiable. Much of science does that, and it's a very important corrective tool, as I believe it is in most religion today, which is you make a claim, you put it out there, you argue about it, you debate it. But it's not as though these are in opposite camps. So the last thing I want to just state a dissent from is I don't believe that it's that religion lost because science won, because many of the people who have given us the Enlightenment and science were themselves motivated by a desire to read God's text, which is the world. So is there a lot of nonsense that is proposed in the name of religion? For sure. Is it egregious? Absolutely. Every criticism you've made, I think, is despicable and accurate and dead on. But that doesn't taint religion as a whole any more than the notion that you can measure people's craniums and look at their racial feature and then put up a hierarchy of human mattering, which was tenured at Harvard University within the past century, discredits science as a whole. There is every human enterprise that is capable of egregious mistake and of brilliant insight. The last thing I want to say, really the last thing for now, is if you insist on reading Shakespeare literally, then he also would be a dunce, but you would have missed his greatness. And some of the greatest literature in the world, billions of people have thought, were religious literature. I find very inspiring much of religious literature, and I find deeply offensive much of religious literature. But it's literature made by people to make sense of the world and to chart lives of meaning and of value. I think that's good.
Well, does this bloody work? Okay. And at least it obscures my face if it doesn't project my voice. I'd like to be the first to rush to the common ground that's just been offered us, which consists of a very large and quite long admission that religion is man-made, which is our point to begin with. Thank you.
I wanted to veer a little bit back towards the afterlife, or forward to the afterlife, and say, we talked a little bit about that we don't know what happens, and there could be this sense of consciousness existing out of our bodies. Isn't religion, all these concepts of an afterlife, can't we just talk of it in terms of metaphor and kind of agree that religion is the best metaphor, or has provided some metaphors for what the rest of us would call an afterlife? Is that what it amounts to?
I think there's some confusion here. I think there's a real asymmetry between science and religion that shouldn't go unobserved. And there's an effort on the part of David and Bradley to not own the very clear propositional claims that have been made by every religion for millennia. Claims about the way the universe is structured. Very explicit claims about what's going to happen in the future, about what happened in the past, about what happens after death. And these claims are incompatible. So, for instance, if Buddhism is true, Buddhism purports to be true. Buddhism has a doctrine of karma and rebirth. You can be reborn as an animal. You can be reborn in various realms. If Buddhism is true, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are absolutely false in their core claims. I mean, these are not pictures that can be squared logically. And every religion is in the business of making these claims about the afterlife and about all manner of other things. And the crucial difference between religion and science is that every religion is beholden to its literature and doesn't think, for the most part, apart from the fringe of kind of liberal intelligentsia, for the most part, people don't think it's man-made. They don't think that these are just books. If everyone read the Bible like Shakespeare, Hitch and I would be doing something entirely unrecognizable right now. I mean, there would be no problem. And so the problem we're articulating is everyone has this idea that they have knowledge about the afterlife, the end of days, the virgin birth of certain people, etc. And these are claims to truth, and they are profoundly anti-scientific because you can't edit the books. You can't edit the Quran. You can't edit the Bible. You can't acknowledge freely within the context of the faith that there are just mountains of life-destroying nonsense in these books, and that's a problem.
So talk a little bit, then we'll move on to the next. Yeah, give a brief
I want to just say this, that it is undeniable what Sam said about the fact that there are truth claims in different traditions that contradict each other. But here's what I think ought not to go unnoticed. I've been at any number, as almost every clergy has at one time or another, I've been any number of interfaith conferences. I was just spoke at an interfaith conference in San Diego on labor in different traditions, okay? And it was everything from Native American, there was a Native American dance, there was a Buddhist chant, there was a reading from the Quran, you know, and the Jew talked. So it was a true interfaith conference. And here's what was so interesting about the time that we all spent before we went out on stage to do our dances, either literal or metaphorical. We were all talking about our traditions. We all understood that there were serious differences about part of it, and everybody there, I think in all sincerity, and not just to be nice, agreed that there was a profound core of similarity in these religious traditions, that we saw the world as more than material, that we saw human beings as having a sacred destiny, not only an occupational destiny, that we thought that kindness and goodness was the mandate of whatever force we understood to run the world. I mean, these are serious, and they are truth claims, but they're truth claims that are outside the realm of science. Science can't decide whether there is, in fact, a sacred destiny to your life. It doesn't ask those kinds of questions or give those kinds of answers. Religion does. And the day that you say that all of religion is off the table because, after all, it says in Genesis that the world was created in 7 days and we know that's not true, then what you do is you throw out the very serious, comprehensive, and shared questions of meaning of human life that really, really matter to the way people live, and that you ought not to do.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what evidence there is for an afterlife, because when you read books about it, it inevitably comes up that people purport there to be evidence. So I wanted you all to share your thoughts on that. One of the most common tropes is the near-death experience. There have been, I think, over the last 3 decades, there's been 40 studies of some 3,400 near-death experiences, and they've been published in journals like Lancet and Annals of American Psychological Journals. And Barbara Haggerty did a book on this called Fingerprints of God, where she interviewed a lot of the people who did these studies that were published in peer-reviewed journals, and a lot of the people she interviewed said that they cannot help but think, after investigating these in a scientific way, that they point to something beyond this life.
I would say almost that was wrong by definition, because it's a near-death experience. It means you didn't die.
But it's the best we have.
No. If someone is reported dead on Tuesday and you see them on Friday, the overwhelming, well, not the obvious conclusion is that the initial report was mistaken. We have no reason to think otherwise. I've read a lot about this stuff. In fact, I have 2, if you care to get the Portable Atheist, which I edited, there are 2 accounts by great philosophers, the late A.J. Ayer, and fortunately very current Daniel Dennett, about their own so-called near-death experiences, hospital experiences of people who were battling with very grave onslaughts on their health, which I recommend you read for the very confirming rationality that they bring to it. Dinesh D'Souza, who's a frequent debating partner of mine, has written a book about this too, and the most persuasive example from any hospital he's found, and I get it all the time, is a woman who floated out of her body, out of the bed, made a tour of the outside of the hospital,
saw the shoe,
noticed that there was a running shoe on one of the windowsills, woke up, reported it to a nurse, whose name we've never been told, and who went and looked, and there was the shoe. Now, if that doesn't prove it, I don't know what does. I could hardly be more reassured if I'd been told that it was able to reunite it with its missing pair. NDE is bullshit. It doesn't count. It's not coming back from the dead, nor is it an account of what happens to you when you're gone. It's what can happen to you with the help of life-preserving scientific medicine while you are still alive.
I would just add one thing. This kind of question is still scientifically tractable. People have reasonably serious people have tried to study the near-death
Right.
experience. And this idea of consciousness somehow rising, dissociating from the body and rising to a point above the operating theater and looking down on the body, the phenomenology there is common enough that people seem to think that this is testable. And so some people have put random number generators on the top of cabinets in the operating theater, just on the odd chance that someone comes back saying, I saw this weird digital readout above your cabinets, and it was 35721. That would be very interesting. Now, no one to my knowledge has done that, but if people, this is something we could set up this experiment in advance. It wouldn't be merely anecdotal.
Have they put shoes up there? Because sometimes that...
Well, it's obviously structured along the same lines, but again, there's a reason why we can't make a research program based on that one shoe.
It's about
so
as
it's
good as the
testable,
people.
and there's no data there.
But people are just as convinced that they used in past lives to be. It always tends to be a princess,